You don't belong here. The sharp command cut through the cool morning air just as Evelyn Carter stepped onto the wide granite plaza leading to the state Supreme Court. Conversations stopped. Footsteps slowed. Dozens of heads turned toward the young black woman standing alone at the bottom of the courthouse stairs. She paused, one hand holding a slim leather briefcase, the other adjusting the strap of her camel-colored coat against the breeze. At 32, Evelyn carried herself with quiet confidence rather than authority. Her dark hair was neatly gathered into a low bun, and she wore no jewelry beyond a simple silver watch. Nothing about her appearance screamed wealth or political influence. She looked like another attorney arriving early for work, or perhaps an assistant preparing documents before a hearing. Officer Ryan Mitchell saw something entirely different. He stepped forward from the security checkpoint, his polished boots echoing across the stone pavement. I said stop. Evelyn stopped. Ryan's hand rested casually on the holster at his hip. It wasn't a threatening gesture, but it was deliberate enough for everyone nearby to notice. This entrance is restricted. Evelyn looked up at the towering columns of the courthouse before returning her calm gaze to the officer. I'm aware. Then you should know this entrance isn't for the public. I understand. Ryan frowned. Her calmness irritated him more than if she had argued. So why are you still standing here? I have business inside. The officer let out a dry laugh. So does everyone else. A few people waiting in line exchanged uncertain glances. A television news crew setting up across the street instinctively turned one of their cameras toward the growing confrontation. Two law students whispered to each other while pretending not to watch. Ryan folded his arms. What kind of business? Evelyn answered simply. I'm expected. By who? She offered a polite smile. The court. The words only made him smirk. The court. He looked her up and down slowly, lingering just long enough to make the gesture feel insulting. That's funny. She remained silent. Ryan took another step closer. You. Lawyers usually carry credentials where I can see them. I'm not a lawyer. His eyebrows lifted. Well, that explains it. A few people chuckled nervously. The sound lingered in the air longer than it should have. Evelyn neither reacted nor lowered her eyes. Instead, she quietly asked, May I continue inside? Ryan shook his head. Not until I know exactly who you are. I've already told you. No. His voice became louder. You've avoided every question I've asked. Several courthouse employees emerged from a side entrance, but stopped when they noticed the scene unfolding. None of them immediately recognized Evelyn from this distance. Ryan sensed the attention gathering around him. Oddly, it fueled his confidence. He wanted the crowd to see him taking control. You people think you can just walk into government buildings whenever you feel like it. The words landed heavily. Some spectators shifted uncomfortably. Evelyn noticed it too. She inhaled slowly before answering. I believe everyone deserves to be treated with respect. Ryan laughed again. Respect is earned. She looked directly into his eyes. I agree. That answer caught him off guard. For a split second, he expected an argument. Instead, she simply stood there, composed and patient, as though she had all the time in the world. It only made him more determined to prove she didn't belong. Identification. Without hesitation, Evelyn reached into her coat pocket. Ryan extended his hand. But before she could hand over her identification, his radio crackled with static. He ignored it. His attention never left the woman in front of him. Behind Evelyn, another black SUV slowly turned onto the street bordering the courthouse. Then another. Neither vehicle activated emergency lights. Neither stopped at the main entrance. No one paid them much attention. Not yet. Ryan glanced briefly toward the vehicles before returning his focus to Evelyn. You know, he said with a smug grin, people who lie usually make the same mistake. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. And what's that? They believe confidence can replace credentials. She calmly slipped the identification back into her pocket. I wasn't trying to convince you. Ryan's expression hardened. Then what exactly are you doing here? For the first time that morning, Evelyn's eyes drifted toward the massive bronze doors of the courthouse. The hearing scheduled to begin in less than 20 minutes would shape constitutional law across the entire state. Inside, hundreds of attorneys, reporters, and government officials were already taking their seats. Outside, none of them realized that one of the people responsible for deciding that historic case was still standing at the bottom of the courthouse steps, being publicly questioned by the very officer sworn to protect the building. And just as Ryan opened his mouth to order her off the property, the rear door of the first black SUV quietly swung open. Justice Evelyn Carter had never believed that respect should arrive before character. Long before newspapers called her a legal prodigy or politicians debated her historic appointment to the state Supreme Court, she had learned a lesson that shaped every decision she would ever make. People often revealed who they truly were when they believed no one important was watching. That was why she rarely introduced herself by her title. At just 32 years old, Evelyn had become the youngest associate justice in the history of her state. Law schools invited her to speak. National legal journals analyzed her opinions. Television commentators described her as one of the brightest constitutional minds of her generation. Yet almost none of those accomplishments could be seen from the outside. She preferred it that way. On most mornings, she drove herself to work in a modest gray sedan instead of using the security vehicles assigned to members of the court. She stopped at the same neighborhood coffee shop every Tuesday, where the elderly owner knew her simply as Miss Evelyn. She waited patiently in grocery store lines, carried her own shopping bags, and never corrected strangers who assumed she worked as a paralegal or administrative assistant. Titles disappeared. Character remained. That belief had carried her through every obstacle life had placed in front of her. Growing up on the south side of the city, Evelyn had watched her mother work double shifts as a public school teacher while her father repaired buses for the city's transportation department. Money was always tight, but discipline never was. Her mother often repeated the same sentence whenever Evelyn came home upset after facing prejudice at school. Asterisk, never let someone else's ignorance decide who you become. Asterisk, those words stayed with her long after childhood. She graduated first in her class from college, earned a full scholarship to one of the nation's top law schools, and built a reputation as an attorney who prepared twice as hard as everyone else in the courtroom. She wasn't interested in winning arguments. She wanted justice to survive them. Years later, when the governor nominated her to the state Supreme Court, critics questioned her age more than her ability. Too young, too inexperienced, too ambitious. Evelyn answered none of them publicly. Instead, she allowed her rulings to speak. Within 3 years, legal scholars across the country were citing her opinions in constitutional cases, praising the clarity of her reasoning and the compassion woven into every decision. Despite the attention, she refused to let prestige change her daily life. Even her security detail found her habits frustrating. Chief Security Officer Daniel Brooks had reminded her countless times, "Your Honor, you're one of the highest-profile judges in the state. Please let us escort you." She always smiled politely. "And I'll call if I need you." This morning had been no different. She had left home before sunrise, enjoying the quiet drive through streets still waking beneath a pale orange sky. The constitutional hearing scheduled for that morning would affect voting rights across the entire state. Hundreds of attorneys, journalists, and elected officials would be inside the courthouse before 9 o'clock. Evelyn arrived early because she valued preparation more than ceremony. She parked her own car several blocks away, picked up a coffee from the corner cafe, and walked the remaining distance alone. She enjoyed those final minutes of peace. The sound of birds settling on courthouse rooftops. The crisp autumn air. The familiar sight of marble columns glowing beneath the morning sun. It reminded her that every day carried the same responsibility, regardless of headlines or history. Then she heard the voice. "Hey, you don't belong here." The words echoed across the plaza. She stopped, turned, and found herself looking at a uniformed police officer she had never met. For a brief moment, Evelyn considered reaching into her coat pocket and presenting the official judicial identification she always carried. The encounter could end in seconds. Instead, something held her hand still. Not pride. Not anger. Curiosity. She wanted to know how the officer would treat a complete stranger who appeared to have no influence, no recognizable face, and no visible authority. Would he remain respectful? Would he assume the best? Or would he allow appearances to determine his judgment? As the officer continued questioning her in front of a growing crowd, Evelyn never raised her voice. She answered every question calmly. She watched carefully, not as a judge preparing to punish, but as someone witnessing a lesson unfold in real time. Because she had learned long ago that prejudice rarely announced itself with hatred. More often, it appeared disguised as certainty. And standing at the foot of the courthouse steps, Justice Evelyn Carter began to realize that this ordinary morning was about to become anything but ordinary. Officer Ryan Mitchell had spent nearly 12 years wearing a badge, and during that time he had developed an unwavering confidence in one thing: his instincts. They had kept him alive. They had earned him commendations. They had convinced his supervisors that he could make quick decisions under pressure. To Ryan, hesitation was dangerous. Confidence was survival. That mindset had followed him through every assignment, from night patrols in violent neighborhoods to crowd control during political demonstrations. He had broken up fights, responded to armed robberies, rescued children from house fires, and once received a medal after pulling an unconscious driver from a burning vehicle. His record was impressive. His reputation even more so. 3 weeks earlier, the department had transferred him to the state Supreme Court Security Division. Most officers considered courthouse duty uneventful. Ryan considered it an opportunity. The courthouse wasn't just another government building. It represented power itself. Governors testified there. Billion-dollar lawsuits were argued there. Constitutional rulings made inside those marble walls affected millions of people across the state. Protecting that building meant protecting the rule of law. Ryan took that responsibility seriously. Every morning, he arrived 30 minutes early. He inspected every security checkpoint himself. He checked emergency exits twice. He greeted senior court staff with crisp professionalism. His supervisors appreciated his discipline. Few noticed his greatest weakness. Ryan trusted first impressions far more than facts. Without realizing it, he had built an invisible checklist inside his mind. People wearing expensive tailored suits usually belonged. Older white attorneys carrying embossed leather briefcases rarely attracted suspicion. Business executives stepped through security with little more than a polite greeting. Well-dressed judges were recognized almost immediately. Everyone else had to prove themselves. Ryan never admitted this bias, even to himself. If anyone had asked, he would have answered honestly, "I treat everybody exactly the same." He believed those words. That made them even more dangerous. Because unconscious prejudice rarely announces itself with hatred. It hides inside assumptions that feel perfectly reasonable. This morning had started like every other. The courthouse plaza slowly filled with attorneys discussing last-minute arguments. Judicial clerks hurried toward the entrance carrying stacks of legal files. Television crews assembled across the street, preparing live broadcasts for the constitutional hearing scheduled to begin at 9 o'clock. Ryan noticed everything. The nervous witness checking his notes. The elderly couple searching for the correct entrance. The delivery driver unloading bottled water. Then he saw her. A young black woman walking toward the courthouse alone. No security escort. No official vehicle. No visible identification. She carried herself calmly, almost elegantly, but Ryan barely noticed that. Instead, his mind reached an immediate conclusion. She doesn't belong here. The judgment formed so naturally that he never questioned it. By the time she reached the courthouse steps, he had already decided to stop her. Now, standing before a growing crowd, Ryan became increasingly aware that people were watching. Law students slowed their pace. Court employees paused near the revolving doors. 2 journalists quietly redirected their cameras. Every interaction at the state Supreme Court attracted attention. Ryan felt those eyes on him. Rather than making him cautious, the audience strengthened his resolve. He wanted everyone to see an officer unwilling to compromise security. He folded his arms across his chest. You still haven't explained why you're here. The young woman remained composed. I told you. I'm expected. Ryan shook his head. That's not an answer. It is. No. His tone sharpened. It's an excuse. Several spectators exchanged uncomfortable glances. One middle-aged attorney whispered to his colleague. This is getting awkward. His colleague nodded. She's staying remarkably calm. Ryan ignored them. He took another deliberate step closer. Listen carefully. If you don't identify yourself right now, I'm going to remove you from courthouse property. Silence settled across the plaza. Even. The television crew stopped talking. The woman looked directly at him. Her expression never changed. I've been respectful. You've been evasive. I've answered every question. You haven't answered the important one. And what question is that? Ryan's jaw tightened. Who do you think you are? The question lingered in the air. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked past him toward the massive bronze doors of the courthouse. Inside those walls, hundreds of attorneys were already taking their seats for one of the most significant constitutional hearings of the year. Outside, no one realized that one of the justices responsible for deciding that case was still standing at the bottom of the courthouse steps. Waiting. Watching. Learning. Ryan mistook her silence for fear. His confidence grew. He reached toward the radio clipped to his shoulder. Dispatch, he said firmly. Front entrance. I may need additional personnel. The words echoed across the plaza. People instinctively stepped farther away. The tension became impossible to ignore. At that exact moment, 3 black SUVs rolled silently to the curb behind the crowd. Their tinted windows reflected the morning sun. The engine shut off. No emergency lights flashed. No sirens sounded. No one paid them much attention. Not yet. But inside the lead vehicle, someone had already witnessed everything. The 3 black SUVs remained parked quietly along the curb. Their engines were off. Their tinted windows reflected the towering marble columns of the state Supreme Court, hiding the people inside. No one in the growing crowd paid them much attention. No one except Evelyn Carter. She noticed them immediately. Not because she expected them. Because she recognized the security detail assigned to every justice during high-profile hearings. She also noticed something else. No one had stepped out. They were waiting. Waiting for her signal. Or perhaps waiting to see if the situation could resolve itself peacefully. Evelyn hoped it would. She had spent her entire legal career believing that authority should be exercised with restraint. Power was most honorable when it remained invisible. Officer Ryan Mitchell, however, interpreted the silence very differently. He believed he had gained complete control of the encounter. The crowd had grown larger. Attorneys arriving for court slowed their pace. Court employees gathered near the entrance. Several journalists had quietly repositioned their cameras, sensing that something unusual was unfolding before the morning hearing. Ryan straightened his shoulders. His voice became louder. Ma'am, this is your final warning. Evelyn met his eyes calmly. I've done nothing wrong. You've refused to identify yourself. I offered to cooperate. No. Ryan interrupted sharply. You've avoided every direct question. A middle-aged woman standing nearby frowned. Officer, she said cautiously, she doesn't seem to be causing any trouble. Ryan turned toward her. Ma'am, please don't interfere. The woman immediately stepped back. The atmosphere changed. People who had been whispering moments earlier now remained silent. No one wanted to become part of the confrontation. Ryan turned back toward Evelyn. I'll ask you one last time. What business do you have inside this courthouse? She answered exactly as before. I'm here to fulfill my constitutional responsibilities. Ryan let out a sarcastic laugh. Constitutional responsibilities? Several people exchanged confused looks. To Evelyn, the sentence had been perfectly truthful. To Ryan, it sounded ridiculous. He smirked. That's the most creative excuse I've heard all month. A few uncomfortable laughs echoed from somewhere in the crowd. Evelyn didn't react. She simply folded her hands over the handle of her briefcase. Her breathing remained slow, measured, almost peaceful. Ryan found that composure strangely irritating. People who were caught lying usually became nervous. Their voices cracked. Their eyes wandered. They searched desperately for explanations. She did none of those things. Instead, she looked at him with quiet patience, as though she were waiting for him to discover something on his own. Ryan mistook her patience for arrogance. His pride refused to let the encounter end quietly. He took another deliberate step forward until only a few feet separated them. I'm ordering you to leave courthouse property. I cannot. You mean you won't? I mean I cannot. Why? Because I have sworn an oath to be here. Ryan laughed openly. So now you're claiming some kind of official duty? Yes. His expression hardened. I've met judges. I've met prosecutors. I've met senators. They don't show up looking like. He stopped himself. But the sentence had already landed. Looking like what? Like a young black woman walking alone? Like someone without visible status? The unfinished thought lingered in the silence. Several members of the crowd lowered their eyes. One law student quietly whispered to another. Did he really just say that? Her friend nodded uneasily. I think he did. Evelyn noticed the embarrassment spreading across the plaza. She felt no anger, only disappointment. Her mother's voice echoed gently in her memory. Asterisk, never let someone else's prejudice become your burden. Asterisk, she drew a slow breath, then spoke with the same calm tone she had maintained from the beginning. Officer Mitchell. Hearing his own name startled him. I don't believe we've been introduced. We haven't. Then how do you know my name? Evelyn glanced briefly at the nameplate stitched neatly above his badge. I read it. For the first time that morning, Ryan felt slightly unsettled. There was something about the way she spoke. No hostility. No fear. No urgency. Only quiet certainty. Still, he refused to back down. He reached toward his handcuffs, not drawing them, simply resting his hand there. A gesture everyone nearby immediately noticed. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Several reporters instinctively lifted their cameras higher. A courthouse employee hurried inside the building. Others began recording with their phones. Evelyn remained perfectly still. Her heartbeat quickened slightly, not from fear, but from sadness. She knew exactly what would happen if this continued. She had hoped the officer would choose restraint. Instead, he had chosen escalation. Ryan took one final step. If you don't leave right now. The rear doors of all three black SUVs opened at exactly the same moment. 6 men in dark tailored suits stepped onto the pavement with disciplined precision. Each wore a discreet earpiece. Each moved with practiced coordination. And every eye in the plaza slowly turned toward them. The courthouse plaza fell into complete silence. 6 men in tailored black suits stepped out of the SUVs with synchronized precision, their polished shoes striking the granite pavement in perfect rhythm. Each wore a discreet earpiece. Each scanned the surroundings with practiced eyes before moving toward the confrontation. The crowd instinctively stepped aside. No one spoke. Even the television reporters lowered their voices. Officer Ryan Mitchell frowned. His first thought was simple. Federal agents. Then he noticed something unusual. None of the men looked at him first. Every one of them fixed their attention on the young black woman standing calmly before the courthouse steps. Ryan straightened his posture. Hold it right there, he called out, raising one hand. The lead agent stopped several feet away. He was in his late 40s, broad-shouldered, with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years protecting people whose lives mattered to the state. His eyes briefly examined Ryan's badge before shifting back toward Evelyn. Good morning, Your Honor. His voice was respectful, not loud, but in the silence surrounding the plaza, everyone heard it. Ryan blinked. What? The agent ignored him. Instead, he took another measured step toward Evelyn. My apologies for the delay, Justice Carter. We monitored the situation. We wanted to ensure there was no immediate threat before intervening. Evelyn offered a small nod. I understand. Ryan looked from the suited men back to the woman he had been questioning for nearly 15 minutes. Justice. The word echoed inside his head. Justice? No, that couldn't be right. He laughed awkwardly. There must be some mistake. The lead agent finally turned toward him. There is no mistake. He reached inside his jacket, not quickly enough to alarm anyone, but deliberately enough to command attention, and removed a black leather credential wallet. Opening it toward Ryan, he revealed an official state judicial security identification. Daniel Brooks, Chief of Judicial Protective Services. His expression remained professional. We are assigned to protect Associate Justice Evelyn Carter of the State Supreme Court. Ryan stared at the badge, then at Evelyn, then back at the badge. His face slowly drained of color. Around them, whispers spread through the crowd like a sudden wind. Oh my God. She's a justice? That's Evelyn Carter? The constitutional law expert? I've seen her on television. Several courthouse employees immediately lowered their heads respectfully. Two attorneys who had been watching from the entrance stood frozen. One quietly muttered, "This is going to be everywhere." Across the street, reporters who had expected an ordinary morning hearing suddenly rushed toward the scene. Microphones appeared. Cameras zoomed in. A producer shouted, "Stay live." Ryan barely heard them. His heartbeat pounded inside his ears. He replayed every sentence he had spoken. Asterisk, you don't belong here. Asterisk, asterisk, who do you think you are? Asterisk, asterisk, leave the property. Asterisk, people like you. The unfinished sentence hit him harder now than it had when he spoke it. Daniel Brooks calmly addressed Evelyn. Your Honor, are you all right? I'm perfectly fine. Did the officer make physical contact with you? No. Were you threatened? She paused for a brief moment, then answered honestly. No. Daniel nodded once. Understood. There was no anger in his face, only disciplined professionalism. Ryan swallowed hard. I didn't know. No one answered him. For the first time that morning, the silence felt unbearable. Justice Carter finally turned toward him. She could have humiliated him. She could have demanded his badge. She could have ordered an investigation before every camera now recording the scene. Instead, she simply looked at him with the same calm expression she had worn from the beginning. Officer Mitchell. Her voice remained gentle. I told you I was expected. Ryan couldn't meet her eyes. I'm sorry. The words barely escaped his mouth. They sounded small, fragile, almost childlike. Evelyn didn't respond immediately. She glanced toward the courthouse doors, where judges, attorneys, and staff members had quietly gathered to witness the aftermath. Every face reflected the same question. What would she do now? Daniel Brooks leaned slightly toward her. Your Honor, if you wish, I can request internal affairs immediately. One phone call. That was all it would take. Ryan knew it. His career, his reputation, perhaps everything he had built over 12 years, now rested entirely in the hands of the woman he had judged before ever knowing her name. Evelyn looked at the crowd, then back at the officer standing before her. For a long moment, she said nothing. Finally, she took one slow step forward. And when she opened her mouth to speak, every person on the courthouse plaza held their breath. Not a single person moved. The courthouse plaza, moments earlier filled with whispers, footsteps, and camera shutters, had become eerily still. Even the autumn breeze seemed to soften as Justice Evelyn Carter stood face to face with Officer Ryan Mitchell. Every lens was pointed toward her. Every microphone waited. Every spectator expected the same ending. Retribution. Ryan certainly did. His shoulders, once squared with confidence, now sagged beneath the invisible weight of realization. His mouth was dry. His pulse thundered inside his ears. 12 years of service flashed through his mind, each memory colliding with the humiliating truth standing only a few feet away. He had publicly questioned one of the highest-ranking judges in the state. Not because she had broken the law. Not because she had threatened anyone. But because he had decided, within seconds of seeing her, that she simply didn't look like someone who belonged. The realization was devastating. Ryan began, struggling to find words. Your Honor, I made a terrible mistake. Justice Carter looked at him quietly. There was no anger in her expression. No satisfaction. No triumph. Only a calm sadness that somehow felt heavier than outrage ever could. Around them, reporters adjusted their cameras, hoping to capture the moment that would dominate the evening news. Chief Daniel Brooks stood a respectful distance behind her. "So," he asked softly, "how would you like to proceed?" The question carried enormous weight. Every member of Judicial Protective Services understood what it meant. A formal complaint could be filed immediately. Internal affairs could arrive within minutes. The officer's body camera footage could be preserved before the day ended. State officials would almost certainly open an investigation. Ryan knew it too. His career rested entirely on the next sentence spoken by the woman he had just humiliated. Justice Carter remained silent for several long seconds. She slowly turned her eyes toward the courthouse itself. Its towering marble columns caught the morning sunlight, casting long shadows across the plaza. Hundreds of people had entered those doors seeking justice over the decades. Some had won. Some had lost. But every one of them deserved to be treated with dignity before a verdict was ever reached. She thought about her mother's words. Never let someone else's ignorance decide who you become. Those words had carried her through childhood insults, law school skepticism, political attacks, and public criticism. She refused to abandon them now. Finally, she looked back at Ryan. "Officer Mitchell." "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you know what hurt the most today?" Ryan slowly shook his head. She spoke gently. "It wasn't that you questioned me." His eyes lifted slightly. "It wasn't even that you doubted me." A tear formed in the corner of Ryan's eye before he quickly blinked it away. "It was that you had already decided who I was before asking who I am." The words landed with quiet force. No one interrupted. Even the reporters lowered their microphones. Justice Carter continued. "If I had been exactly who you assumed I was." She glanced briefly toward the people gathered around them. Someone without influence. Someone cleaning this building. Someone delivering supplies. Someone visiting for the first time. Would I have deserved any less respect? Ryan couldn't answer. Because he already knew the truth. "No," he whispered. Justice Carter nodded. "No." Silence returned. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. It wasn't a smile of victory. It was the kind of smile a teacher offers a student who has finally understood a difficult lesson. "I won't ask for your suspension." Gasps spread quietly through the crowd. Daniel Brooks looked at her. "Your Honor, I won't request disciplinary action today." Ryan stared at her in disbelief. "You won't." She shook her head. "I believe accountability matters. But accountability isn't always punishment." The words hung in the crisp morning air. She took one slow step closer. "I want something far more difficult." Ryan swallowed. "What is it?" "I want you to remember this morning every time someone walks toward you wearing ordinary clothes." She paused. "Every elderly man. Every teenager. Every immigrant. Every janitor. Every attorney. Every black woman. Treat them as though they matter before you know their title." Ryan lowered his head. For the first time in years, his badge felt impossibly heavy. "I will." His voice cracked. "I promise." Justice Carter studied him carefully. She had spent years evaluating witnesses from the bench. She knew when people lied. She also knew genuine remorse when she saw it. This wasn't fear. It was transformation beginning. She extended her hand. For a second, Ryan simply stared at it. Moments earlier, that same hand had attempted to present identification. He had refused to see it. Now it offered something infinitely more valuable. Grace. Slowly, almost trembling, Ryan reached out and shook her hand. The cameras captured the moment from every angle. Not the defeat of a police officer. Not the triumph of a Supreme Court justice. But the quiet victory of humanity over prejudice. If this moment touched your heart, remember that true strength is not found in power, it is found in the courage to choose compassion when you have every right to choose revenge. As Justice Carter released Ryan's hand and turned toward the courthouse steps, no one noticed Chief Daniel Brooks receive a discreet message through his earpiece. His expression changed instantly. He looked toward the entrance. Then toward Justice Carter. Something unexpected was happening inside the courthouse. Just as Evelyn Carter had barely reached the first marble step when Chief Daniel Brooks touched the discreet earpiece beneath his collar. His expression changed instantly. He turned toward her. "Your Honor." She paused. "The Chief Justice and the full court have been informed." Evelyn nodded calmly. "I assumed they would be. They're requesting a brief delay before the hearing begins." She glanced toward the massive bronze doors. "Why?" Daniel lowered his voice. "Because word has already spread through the building." Almost as if on cue, the courthouse doors slowly opened. One by one, judges, clerks, attorneys, and court staff stepped onto the front landing. Some had been preparing for one of the most significant constitutional hearings in years. Instead, they now found themselves witnessing another kind of lesson, one no courtroom could have planned. The crowd instinctively parted. Standing at the top of the staircase was Chief Justice Margaret Holloway, a woman whose 35 years on the bench had earned respect across the nation. Beside her stood 5 associate justices. Each wore the traditional black judicial robe. Each had heard only fragments of what had happened outside. But they had seen enough. Chief Justice Holloway slowly descended the first few steps. "Justice Carter." Her voice carried across the silent plaza. "We've been waiting for you." Evelyn smiled politely. "My apologies for the delay." "There is nothing to apologize for." The older justice turned toward Officer Ryan Mitchell. Her eyes rested on him for only a few seconds. She didn't speak harshly. She didn't need to. The disappointment in her expression was more powerful than anger. Ryan lowered his gaze. "I failed, ma'am." Chief Justice Holloway answered quietly. "No. You failed someone before you knew who she was." The words settled over the crowd like a heavy curtain. Every camera continued recording. News reporters no longer whispered. They knew they were capturing something that would be replayed across the state before the day ended. Ryan felt every eye upon him. His uniform suddenly seemed heavier than it had ever felt. His badge no longer represented pride. It represented responsibility, one he had forgotten. Chief Justice Holloway looked back toward Evelyn. "You may proceed inside whenever you're ready." Instead of moving immediately, Evelyn remained where she was. She looked across the crowd gathered outside the courthouse. Law students, reporters, police officers, attorneys, maintenance workers, visitors waiting for their own hearings. Dozens of strangers from different backgrounds. Every one of them had witnessed the same encounter. If she walked away now, they would remember a police officer making a mistake. But if she spoke, perhaps they would remember something more important. She took a slow breath, then turned toward Ryan once again. "Officer Mitchell." He looked up. "Yes, Your Honor. I have one question." "Anything." "When you first saw me this morning." Ryan swallowed. "What did you see?" He hesitated. Long enough for everyone to understand how difficult the answer was becoming. Finally, he spoke. "I saw someone who didn't fit the picture I had in my head." Evelyn nodded gently. "And what picture was that?" Ryan closed his eyes briefly. "When I imagined a Supreme Court justice, I imagined someone older." He paused. "Someone white." The admission echoed across the plaza. No one reacted. No one needed to. The truth itself carried enough weight. Ryan continued before fear could silence him. "I never realized that assumption was there. I honestly believed I judged people fairly." He looked directly at Evelyn. "I was wrong." There was no excuse. No attempt to defend himself. Only honesty. For the first time that morning, Evelyn believed every word. She stepped closer. "Recognizing prejudice doesn't make you weak." Ryan listened carefully. "Refusing to recognize it does." The sentence seemed to settle into every person standing nearby. A young law student quietly wiped tears from her eyes. One television reporter lowered his microphone, no longer thinking about headlines. Even several police officers stationed farther back stood motionless. Daniel Brooks watched silently. He had protected judges for nearly 20 years. He had witnessed threats, protests, political outrage, even attempted attacks. Yet, he had rarely seen courage expressed with such quiet restraint. Justice Carter continued. "Today wasn't about me." Ryan looked confused. She smiled softly. I've spent my life overcoming assumptions. My title protected me today. She glanced around the plaza. But millions of people don't have titles. They don't have cameras. They don't have security teams. They only have the hope that the first person they meet will treat them with dignity. No one spoke. Because there was nothing to add. The truth was complete. If this moment touched your heart, remember that real justice begins long before a judge enters a courtroom. It begins in the ordinary choices we make when we meet someone we know nothing about. ***. Chief Justice Holloway finally gestured toward the courthouse entrance. It's time. Evelyn gave Ryan one final nod before turning toward the marble staircase. The other justices waited respectfully as she joined them. But just before the courthouse doors closed behind the members of the court, Ryan made a decision that no one, not even Justice Carter, had expected. Just before the bronze doors of the state Supreme Court closed behind the justices, a voice echoed across the silent plaza. Your Honor. Justice Evelyn Carter stopped. She turned slowly. Officer Ryan Mitchell was no longer standing at his security post. Instead, he had walked to the center of the courthouse steps, directly in front of the crowd that had witnessed everything from the beginning. His cap rested beneath his arm. His badge still hung over his heart. But the confidence that had once defined him had been replaced by something far rarer. Humility. Everyone watched. The television cameras continued broadcasting live. Attorneys delayed entering the courthouse. Even the reporters, normally eager to ask questions, remained silent. Ryan took a slow breath. Then, in front of every camera, every courthouse employee, every citizen standing on the plaza, he spoke. I owe more than an apology. His voice trembled slightly. This morning, I failed the very people I swore to protect. The words surprised everyone. No lawyer had coached him. No supervisor had instructed him. This wasn't damage control. It was confession. Ryan looked directly at Justice Carter. When I saw you, I didn't see a citizen. I didn't see a woman deserving respect. I saw my own assumptions. His eyes lowered. And I treated those assumptions as facts. The silence surrounding the plaza became almost sacred. Chief Justice Margaret Holloway remained motionless on the steps. Daniel Brooks quietly folded his hands behind his back. Neither interrupted. This moment belonged entirely to Ryan. He continued. I've always believed integrity meant admitting mistakes. But today I learned something harder. Integrity means changing after you admit them. Several officers assigned to courthouse security exchanged thoughtful glances. One of them quietly removed his sunglasses. Another lowered his head. Ryan turned toward them. I don't want anyone defending what I did. If another officer had treated my wife, or my daughter, the way I treated Justice Carter this morning, I would have been furious. He paused. So why should anyone else's family accept less? The question lingered over the crowd. No one answered. No one needed to. Ryan slowly faced Justice Carter once again. Your Honor, I know forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't erase the embarrassment. It doesn't erase the message my actions sent to everyone standing here. His voice nearly broke. But if you'll allow it, I want today to become the day I stopped being the officer who judged people by appearance. I want it to become the day I finally learned how to see people. Justice Carter looked at him for several long seconds. She had listened to thousands of witnesses during her years on the bench. She had heard rehearsed apologies, strategic apologies, political apologies, legal apologies. This sounded different. Because it wasn't asking to escape consequences. It was accepting them. She slowly walked back down 2 marble steps until she stood only a few feet away from him. The cameras zoomed closer. Reporters held their breath. Ryan looked up uncertainly. Justice Carter smiled gently. Officer Mitchell. Growth begins the moment pride ends. He nodded silently. You've taken the first step. She reached into the leather briefcase she had carried all morning. The crowd watched curiously. Instead of removing legal documents, she pulled out a simple white business card. She handed it to him. Ryan accepted it carefully. On the front was her judicial contact information. On the back, handwritten in blue ink, was a single sentence. Respect should never depend on someone's title, Ryan stared at the words. His vision blurred. I'll keep this for the rest of my life. I hope you do. She smiled. Because one day, another young officer may learn this lesson from you instead of from me. Those words struck him more deeply than any punishment ever could. Daniel Brooks stepped forward. Your Honor, the hearing is ready. She nodded. Before turning toward the courthouse entrance, Evelyn looked once more at the crowd gathered across the plaza. Some people were wiping away tears. Others stood quietly, reflecting on everything they had witnessed. No one seemed interested in cheering. There had been no victory over an enemy. Only a victory over prejudice. A young black law student standing near the back of the crowd quietly whispered to her professor, I've never seen power look like that before. Her professor smiled softly. That's because you weren't looking at power. You were looking at character. The student watched Justice Carter climb the remaining courthouse steps. For the first time in her life, becoming a judge no longer seemed like an impossible dream. It suddenly felt reachable. If this moment touched your heart, remember that the greatest victories are not the ones that defeat another person. They are the ones that transform a human heart. As the massive bronze doors slowly closed behind Justice Carter and the other members of the court, Ryan remained standing alone on the courthouse steps. He looked down at the handwritten sentence on the back of the card one more time. Then he clipped his cap back onto his head, straightened his uniform, and returned to his security post. But everyone who saw him knew the man wearing that badge was no longer the same officer who had reported for duty that morning. The heavy bronze doors closed with a deep, deliberate echo. For a moment, the noise lingered beneath the vaulted ceiling of the state Supreme Court before dissolving into silence. Justice Evelyn Carter walked through the grand hallway beside the other members of the court, her measured footsteps blending with theirs across the polished marble floor. Sunlight streamed through the towering windows, casting long bands of gold that stretched toward the courtroom ahead. No one spoke. There was no need. The events outside had already become part of the building's history. As the justices reached the robing room, Chief Justice Margaret Holloway paused before entering. She turned toward Evelyn. I've served on this court for 35 years. Evelyn met her eyes. I've seen remarkable lawyers, remarkable judges, remarkable decisions. The older woman smiled gently. But today, I witnessed remarkable character. Evelyn lowered her head slightly. Thank you. Chief Justice Holloway rested a hand briefly on her shoulder. You reminded every person outside that justice is more than what happens inside a courtroom. It's how people choose to treat one another. With that, she quietly entered the robing room. Evelyn stood alone for a brief moment. She looked through one of the tall windows overlooking the courthouse plaza. Far below, the crowd had begun to disperse. Reporters packed away cameras. Law students hurried toward morning classes. Attorneys returned to preparing arguments. Life moved forward. But one figure remained exactly where she had last seen him. Officer Ryan Mitchell. He had returned to his security post. His posture was different now. Not weaker. Simply quieter. He greeted each visitor with the same words. Good morning. Welcome. Take your time. He smiled at an elderly janitor pushing a cleaning cart through the security checkpoint. Morning, sir. The older man smiled back. Ryan checked his identification with the same professionalism he had shown attorneys earlier. No impatience. No assumptions. Only respect. Moments later, a young black woman carrying a backpack approached the entrance. She looked nervous. Probably a first-year law student. Ryan noticed the uncertainty in her face. Instead of barking instructions, he stepped aside. Good morning. She hesitated. I'm sorry. Is this the right entrance for public seating? It is. He smiled warmly. You're right on time. Good luck today. The student returned the smile. Thank you, officer. She walked inside with a little more confidence than she had arrived with. Ryan watched her disappear through the doors. Then, almost without thinking, his hand slipped into his uniform pocket. He removed the white business card Justice Carter had given him. The handwritten sentence caught the morning light. Respect should never depend on someone's title. He read it once. Then again. Carefully, He placed it inside the transparent sleeve behind his badge, where he would see it every morning before beginning his shift. Not as a reminder of his embarrassment, as a reminder of the officer he wanted to become. Weeks passed. The incident never became the scandal many reporters expected. Justice Carter declined every interview request. She refused to allow the story to become about revenge. Instead, she quietly partnered with the Judicial Protective Services and the police department to develop a voluntary training program focused on professional respect, implicit bias, and constitutional dignity. Officer Ryan Mitchell became the first officer to enroll. Not because anyone ordered him to, because he asked to. Months later, new recruits entering courthouse security heard a story during orientation. It wasn't about disciplinary action. It wasn't about a famous judge. It wasn't even about a mistake. It was about a morning when two people stood on opposite sides of authority, and one of them chose grace over humiliation. The instructors ended every session with the same sentence. Asterisk, every person who approaches these doors deserves dignity before identification. Asterisk, years later, visitors to the state Supreme Court often noticed something unusual about the officer stationed at the front entrance. He greeted everyone exactly the same. Governors, custodians, attorneys, delivery drivers, tourists, students. No one received more courtesy because of expensive clothing. No one received less because of ordinary appearance. Most people never knew why. Only Ryan knew. And every once in a while, when Justice Evelyn Carter walked past him on her way into the courthouse, he would stand a little straighter. Not because she was a Supreme Court justice, but because she had shown him that the strongest people are not those who hold power over others. They are those who use their power to lift others higher. Justice Carter would return his respectful nod with a quiet smile before continuing toward the courtroom. No words were exchanged. None were necessary. Between them existed an understanding that could never be written into law. The morning sunlight poured across the marble steps once more, warming the stone where a confrontation had once divided strangers. Now there was only the steady rhythm of footsteps, the murmur of ordinary conversations, and the quiet certainty that justice had spoken long before a judge ever lifted a gavel. Sometimes the most powerful verdict is not announced from the bench. Sometimes it is written silently in a changed heart.